Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today, we're tackling one of the biggest, most enduring questions in military history. Why did Napoleon lose at Waterloo? It's a question that has filled libraries and fueled debate for over 2 centuries, and the simple answer that the British and Prussians won doesn't even begin to scratch the surface. This wasn't just a battle. It was the ultimate, high-stakes collision of egos, armies, and sheer bad luck. In a matter of hours, on June 18, 1815, the fate of Europe was decided on a rain-soaked field in Belgium. To truly understand this seismic defeat, we must look beyond the final charge of the Imperial Guard and investigate the deeper, more complex web of failures, strategic, personal, and environmental, that ended the greatest military mind of his age. I've immersed myself in the works of leading historians, notably Bernard Cornwell's *Waterloo, The History of 4 Days, 3 Armies, and 3 Battles*, which provides that vivid, boots-on-the-ground perspective. David G. Chandler's *The Campaigns of Napoleon*, for its masterclass in strategic military analysis. Andrew Roberts's definitive biography, *Napoleon, A Life*, which explores the emperor's mindset in 1815, and Gordon Corrigan's *Waterloo, A New History*, for its professional soldiers' appraisal of the armies and tactics. We're going to use these brilliant resources to break down the 4 critical phases of failure that answer the question, why Napoleon lost at Waterloo. So grab a cup of coffee, settle in, and let's dive into the ultimate guide to Napoleon's final fatal campaign. Phase 1. The strategic blunder, Ligny, Quatre Bras, and the Grouchy dilemma. Our story begins not at Waterloo itself, but 2 days prior, in the battles of Ligny and Quatre Bras. Napoleon's initial strategic goal for the 1815 campaign was brilliant in its simplicity: divide the Allied armies, Wellington's Anglo-Allied force and Blucher's Prussians, and defeat them in detail before the Russians and Austrians could arrive. He successfully drove a wedge between them. At Ligny on June 16th, Napoleon defeated the Prussians, an important victory, but one that was incomplete. Chandler, in *The Campaigns of Napoleon*, argues that Napoleon's failure to inflict a coup de grace on Blucher's army, allowing them to retreat in reasonable order, was a fundamental mistake. This wasn't the Napoleon of Austerlitz, who would have annihilated an escaping force. The French pursuit was lackluster. This leads us directly to the most controversial strategic decision: the detachment of Marshal Grouchy. On the morning of June 17th, Napoleon ordered Marshal Emmanuel de Grouchy to take a sizable force, about 33,000 men and 96 guns, and pursue the Prussians, ensuring they could not rejoin Wellington. This was a reasonable order, but the execution was catastrophically flawed. Gordon Corrigan, from his military perspective in *Waterloo, A New History*, notes that Grouchy was not a marshal renowned for independent command or strategic flair. He was a cavalryman, not a corps commander suited to reading the strategic map. The intelligence was poor, and Grouchy mistakenly pursued the Prussians' line of retreat toward Liege, when in fact, the bulk of Blucher's army had fallen back north toward Wavre, keeping open a route to Wellington's left flank. The famous, or infamous, letter from Soult to Grouchy on the morning of Waterloo, which was both vague and arrived late, is a historical flashpoint. Could Grouchy have marched to the sound of the guns? Should he have been more aggressive in his pursuit? Bernard Cornwell's *Waterloo*, while focusing on the soldiers' experiences, highlights the sheer, stubborn determination of the Prussians to march through the mud and rain, a human factor Grouchy entirely failed to account for. By diverting nearly a third of his army to chase a phantom, Napoleon's fundamental strategic error was underestimating the Prussian commitment to their alliance. When the French line saw Prussian standards appear on their flank late in the day at Waterloo, the psychological damage was as devastating as the physical blow. Chandler and Roberts both suggest that this reliance on Grouchy's competence, where a different, more decisive marshal was needed, was a catastrophic failure of delegation by Napoleon himself. Phase 2. The physical and mental decline of the emperor. Shifting from strategy to the commander himself, we must ask, was the Napoleon of 1815 the same unstoppable eagle of the past? Many historians, including those whose works we are studying, have debated this. Andrew Roberts, in his extensive biography *Napoleon, A Life*, argues against the popular narrative of a physically broken man, suggesting Napoleon was more than capable on the day. However, he does concede that the sheer energy, lightning decisiveness, and excessive attention to detail that defined the young Bonaparte were a lesson. The campaign was not conducted with the customary Napoleonic speed. For instance, The delay in beginning the attack at Waterloo on the morning of June 18 is one of the most cited factors in his defeat. The heavy, torrential rain from the previous night had turned the battlefield into a quagmire. Napoleon chose to wait until the ground dried, allowing his artillery solid footing and giving the cannon balls a better chance to ricochet off the surface, maximizing their killing power. This delay lasted until around 11:30 a.m. Gordon Corrigan points out the tragic irony: the decision, made to maximize the effectiveness of his favorite arm, the artillery, simultaneously gifted the Prussians crucial extra hours to complete their grueling march to the battlefield. The delay was a double-edged sword, prioritizing tactical advantage over strategic necessity. Furthermore, Napoleon's engagement level throughout the day was inconsistent. Unlike his early, iconic battles where he was everywhere assessing every shift in the enemy line, Napoleon spent long periods at a vantage point delegating more heavily. This was exacerbated by what many, including Chandler, identify as a streak of obstinacy and arrogance in the later campaigns. Napoleon dismissed Wellington's army, supposedly calling them bad troops, and the coming fight at breakfast a fatal overconfidence that blinded him to the quality of the Allied veterans, particularly the British infantry and King's German Legion, whom Cornwell vividly describes as holding firm in the face of overwhelming odds. The physical ailments, be they hemorrhoids, a stomach issue, or simply exhaustion, are hard to definitively prove as the single cause, but the fact remains that the emperor did not exhibit the clarity of vision or the relentless pace that had previously made him invincible. As Roberts suggests, the political and emotional pressures of the 100 Days campaign had taken a toll, creating a man who, while still brilliant, was prone to moments of indecision and costly overconfidence. Phase 3. The tactical catastrophe: rain, mud, and Marshal Ney's cavalry charges. The actual Battle of Waterloo was defined by a series of French tactical failures, primarily centered on the actions of Marshal Ney, the bravest of the brave, a man renowned for courage but less so for tactical restraint. The first French attacks were on the fortified farmhouses of Hougoumont and La Haye-Sainte, which served as critical anchors for Wellington's defensive line. The attack on Hougoumont, initially intended as a diversion, became a massive time-eater, source-consuming meat grinder. Bernard Cornwell, who excels at detailing the brutal, close-quarters combat, emphasizes how Hougoumont drew in thousands of French troops who were desperately needed for the main assault on the Allied center. Ney, observing what he incorrectly perceived as a general Allied retreat behind the ridge, ordered a massive, ill-conceived, and unsupported cavalry charge. This is perhaps the single most iconic tactical blunder of the day. Over 9,000 French cavalry, the glorious cuirassiers and lancers, galloped up the slope without infantry or artillery support. As Gordon Corrigan explains, the sole purpose of a massed cavalry charge against infantry is to force the infantry to form defensive squares, which are then vulnerable to artillery fire. Ney failed to coordinate his attacks. The Allied infantry, mostly British and German veterans, formed their famous squares, the head-tugs of bayonets, which were impervious to cavalry alone. The French horsemen rode repeatedly around the squares, suffering casualties from musket fire and, crucially, wasting their strength. The ground, wet from the morning's rain, further sapped the horses' strength, making the charge ineffective. When the British heavy cavalry, under Lord Uxbridge, countercharged, they inflicted a devastating blow, though they too became disorganized in the process. Ney repeated this error, committing more cavalry in a frenzy of fruitless attacks, effectively destroying the French cavalry arm by mid-afternoon. Chandler critiques this as a fundamental breakdown of grand tactics, where the different arms of the military infantry, cavalry, and artillery must be perfectly synchronized. Napoleon, observing the chaos from a distance, was too slow to intervene, another indication of his diminished control. When La Haye-Sainte finally fell to the French, opening a gaping hole in Wellington's center, Napoleon's reserves were already depleted from the costly cavalry charges and the Hougoumont diversion. This tactical series of errors, driven by Ney's impatience and Napoleon's lack of immediate intervention, squandered the most potent offensive weapons the French possessed, paving the way for the later, fatal final act. Phase 4. The Allied resilience: Wellington's line and Blucher's timely arrival. Napoleon's defeat cannot be attributed solely to French errors. It was also a product of the superior defensive generalship of the Duke of Wellington and the incredible loyalty and determination of Field Marshal Blucher and the Prussian army. Wellington's choice of ground was a masterstroke of defensive positioning. By placing his army behind the crest of a ridge, he shielded them from the bulk of the French artillery fire, the very artillery Napoleon had waited hours to use effectively, and concealed the true strength and disposition of his forces. As Gordon Corrigan notes, this use of reverse slope defense was a hallmark of Wellington's Cornwell's tactical genius, learned and perfected in the Peninsular War. The Allied army itself, as Bernard Cornwell reminds us with his focus on the men, was a polyglot force, a mix of experienced British veterans, the dependable King's German Legion, and less reliable Dutch-Belgian troops. Yet, Wellington handled this mixed force with extraordinary skill, plugging gaps with his best troops and maintaining absolute calm under fire. His simple, repeated command, "Stand fast," became the moral backbone of the day. The true game-changer, however, was the Prussians. Blucher, despite his defeat at Ligny, vowed to join Wellington. His chief of staff, Gneisenau, led a relentless march through appalling conditions. Their arrival on Napoleon's right flank, starting in the mid-afternoon, was the strategic inevitability that Grouchy failed to prevent. Andrew Roberts highlights the psychological impact. As the French were launching their final desperate attacks, the sight of the Prussian column emerging from the woods at Plancenoit forced Napoleon to divert his precious reserves, the Young Guard, to secure his flank. This meant the main effort against Wellington would not have the necessary weight. The final fatal decision was to commit the Imperial Guard, Napoleon's ultimate reserve and the symbol of French invincibility. It was meant to be the psychological hammer blow that would shatter Wellington's line. But the Guard, advancing late in the day, were met by the massed fire of the British Foot Guards and the 52nd Light Infantry. Their wavering and eventual retreat was the moment the French army's morale broke, as the cry of "La Garde recule!" The Guard retreats! Swept the French lines. The entire army dissolved into a panicked rout, harried mercilessly by the vengeful Prussians. Wellington's defensive resilience held just long enough for Blucher's furious commitment to turn the French flank, making the Allied cooperation the ultimate external factor in the answer to why Napoleon lost at Waterloo. The four fatal errors and Napoleon's legacy. So, when we synthesize the insights from Cornwell, Chandler, Roberts, and Corrigan, the answer to why Napoleon lost at Waterloo is not a single point, but a chain of four interconnected, fatal errors. First, the strategic blunder of the Grouchy detachment, an incomplete victory at Ligny that left the Prussians alive and marching, and a failure to decisively commit the reserves earlier. Second, the personal and physical decline of the Emperor, which manifested in costly delays like waiting for the ground to dry, and an overconfidence that dismissed the enemy. Third, the tactical catastrophe led by Marshal Ney, whose unsupported cavalry charges pointlessly squandered the French army's most powerful offensive arm against unyielding infantry squares. And finally, the underestimated Allied resilience, specifically Wellington's tactical genius in using the reverse slope defense, and most critically, the indomitable or relentless loyalty of the Prussians under Blucher. Waterloo is, as Wellington famously said, "a damned nice thing, and your own thing." But it was Napoleon's repeated, uncharacteristic errors that tilted the balance. The genius that had swept across Europe was in the end defeated by a series of mistakes, bad luck, and the sheer quality of his opposition's leadership and commitment. This single day ended the Napoleonic era and ushered in a century of relative peace in Europe. Thank you so much for watching this deep dive into one of history's most pivotal battles. If you want to continue exploring the amazing primary and secondary sources we used, you can find links to Bernard Cornwell's Waterloo and the other brilliant books mentioned in the description below. If you learned something new today, please hit that like button, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel. We have a ton of other long-form historical analyses coming soon. Let me know in the comments, which of Napoleon's four fatal errors do you think was the most critical? I look forward to reading your thoughts and discussing them. We'll see you in the next video.